Let's welcome back to LBC News Ryan Shorthouse, who's the founder and chair of Bright Blue. That's an independent centre-right think tank. Always good to talk to you, Ryan. What did you make of the speech?
Well, I thought it was quite funny and honest. She came across as very human and likeable. Her personality came through. So I think, people in the Conservative Party, certainly people in the hall, would think that that was a very good speech. There's been some kind of chatter about, whether she's the right person to lead the party, whether people will be moving against her, particularly in the local elections next year. I think she's probably challenged that a lot with that speech. However, my doubts are that this will really sort of cut through to the wider public and make a significant change in how they view the Conservative Party. I mean, at the end of the day, the kind of three things that came through from conference were that the Tories were cutting climate change targets, they're withdrawing from the ECHR, and they are going to cut stamp duty. I think they're the three memorable things that will come through. And on the first two, I mean, frankly, they are things that Reform have already advocated. And I think basically people who are concerned about those things will stay with Reform. And I don't think it's particularly fiscally sustainable, which is what Kemi said is the centrepiece of what the Conservatives stand for, to not take the necessary action to get to net zero emissions by 2050. The evidence is quite clear that the costs, the huge fiscal costs as a result of extreme weather events will be very enormous and put huge pressure on our public finances, from increased flooding and droughts if we don't take action on climate change. So I have a concern about that. Withdrawing from the ECHR, to be honest, I think that's going to lead to very few deportations. At the moment, of all deportations which are challenged on human rights grounds, only 3% or so are successful. So withdrawing from the ECHR, I think, is going to make minimal difference on deportations and minimal difference on a deterrent effect for migrants. But just thinking politically, I don't think those announcements are really going to change the dial for the Conservatives. I think those sorts of issues are why people are moving to Reform.
But what about stamp duty?
Well, good question, because I do think that where the Conservatives can win popular support and create a distinctive identity is to be the party of economic responsibility, economic mobility, and economic growth. And that's what really Kemi should be focused on. I feel there's been lots of sprawling messages, including in her speech, whereas really I think the party should focus on that, and that's the way to attack a sort of status Labour Party, which is increasing taxes, increasing borrowing, but also a Reform Party, which is, frankly, its spending commitments are worse than what Jeremy Corbyn was proposing. So that's definitely the right direction for the Conservatives.
Interesting tactic, though, wasn't it? Because there was lots of attacks on Labour and the Labour government, but there wasn't too many mentions of Reform, and we know that the Tories are hemorrhaging support to Reform UK. Do you think that was intentional?
I'm not sure, but I think the way to, the thing about Reform's voter base is that it's quite transitory. It's pulling in ex-Labour voters, ex-Conservative voters, ex-Lib Dem voters. But, you're certainly right that a lot of ex-Conservative voters and now some ex-MPs and councillors have defected to Reform. But I think it's, seen as a protest vote at the moment. And I think if the Conservatives can show that they've got, they're focused on, we will turn things around for the economy, we'll make, the economy the central issue that people are concerned about. We will fixate on that rather than on immigration, although that's a problem and needs addressing. But really the prime problem, and you can see this through the polling, when you ask people what affects them individually and personally rather than the nation as a whole, it's very clear that the cost of living and the economy is the problem. So a party that focuses on getting the debt down, making bold measures to do that, and garnering economic growth is where I think the Tory party can again attract votes from who have gone to Reform and to Labour last time. But what I would say is that stamp duty cut, although that will help the housing market in terms of mobility, it does bring about 14 billion from the last year in tax revenues for the Treasury. So, if a party wants to be a party of fiscal responsibility, it has to explain an alternative regime for property taxes, which is going to raise that amount of money. How is the Tory party going to pay for that loss in 14 billion? And, at the end of the day, where I think...
Well, she said they'd worked out their sums, hadn't they? That's what she kept saying.
Well, I'd like to see the sums. But look, I think where the Conservatives can really cut through and win and make people think again is by doing something counterintuitive, where people think, OK, Tories are willing to make the tough decisions here, and it's unexpected what they're doing. What's been announced today around stamp duty, around welfare cuts, all of these things are typical kind of Tory territory, basically. I'd like to see the Tory party say, look, the fiscal situation is so bad that we're going to have to do things like get rid of the triple lock on pensions, on the basic state pension, even means test the basic state pension, as they do in Australia and in Ireland. For example, as well, she talks about winter fuel payments and, opposing Labour's means testing of those. The Conservatives should be bold here and say, we don't believe in any universal benefits. We don't believe that everybody should be receiving money from the state, no matter their financial circumstances, in cash transfers, whether that's for winter fuel payments, free bus passes, which still exist for all elderly people, even free school meals for reception children, year 1, year 2 school children. Why should all families receive that? If we're going to really reduce dependency on the state, the Tories have got to do much bolder than the things that they've proposed here, and counterintuitive stuff like, for example, reducing some of the benefits that older people, which remain their core constituency, receive. Because we have to see the extremeness of the fiscal trajectory we're on. The OBR predicts by the late 2030s, our net public debt will be about 270% of GDP. We cannot carry on like this. We cannot afford the basic state pension that we have and the triple lock on it. We cannot afford universal benefits. The Tories have to make this argument and be bolder with it. What they've announced today, I'm afraid, is not bold enough.
Ryan, I can imagine if you suggested some of those to some of the Tory base, they would probably look at you in shock and horror. But you talk about turning things around. Whatever spin the Tories put on things at the moment, we know that the party's in troubled times. There was that YouGov poll, wasn't there, for Sky News, that if there was an election tomorrow, 45 seats the party would be reduced to. How long is it going to take to turn this oil tanker around?
A long time. They're down, the Tory party, but they're not out. And you have seen in recent years that the electorate is much more volatile. Only in 2021, Boris had won a by-election in a sort of Labour seat, Hartlepool, a traditional Labour seat. And people were talking about years, decades of Boris rule. And then, within a year, he'd gone. And then, by 2024, Labour had won the landslide. So the electorate is much more volatile than it was. I think part of that is because media, particularly social media, is much more omnipresent. People observe the news much more. Narratives change much more quickly. And as a result of that, there is time for the Tory party to turn it around by the next election. But there's a long way to go, because the narrative still is that really the Tories didn't do enough on living standards and economic growth. And in fact, we had the mini budget, which made it a lot worse for mortgage holders. So that narrative still sticks in people's mind. And until the Tories can get rid of that narrative, it's going to be very difficult for people to forgive them. So, all this, there's been talk of, would it have been better if Robert Jenrick had been leader rather than Kemi? To be honest, I don't think it would have made any difference at all. I think people are still angry with the Tory party. It's going to take a long time for them to rebuild confidence in their brand as the party that stands for and will take action on economic responsibility, economic growth, and economic mobility. That's why people vote for the Tory party, that they will make difficult decisions to achieve those things. So that's what the Tories have got to sketch out, and that's what the Tories have got to say is the big problem. That's their way back to being popular again with the electorate, but it will take some time.
Ryan, I always enjoy chatting to you. Thank you so much for that post-match analysis, post-speech analysis, I should say. Stop using a football metaphor. I need to actually say that it's a political metaphor. Ryan Shorthouse is the founder and chair of Bright Blue. That's an independent centre-right think tank. The time is 12:34.